Welcome back to another episode of Rameumptom Ruminations. I'm the host, Scott. Today's episode is called Under the Banner of Heaven Review with RFM. Welcome back to another episode of Rameumptom Ruminations. Today's episode is going to be very special. It's one that I've wanted to do for a while, but just waited for timing and also for the show to finish all the episodes. Today, I'm going to discuss Under the Banner of Heaven with the famous RFM. So welcome back to the show, Radio Free Mormon.
Hi, how are you doing? Have I been here before? You're welcoming me back.
You have. I am welcoming you back. You were here.
I can't even remember what I had for breakfast this morning.
That's all right. No, I had you on the show back in March, I believe.
Oh, that long ago. So that's like 3 months ago. No wonder I can't remember it. That's been like 90 days.
Yeah, we discussed the law last time and your expertise with the law and how that relates to how the church is run.
I'm sorry. Yes, it's all coming back to me now. What a great episode that was, now that I can remember it.
Yeah, it was a fun conversation. Today we're going to discuss Under the Banner of Heaven. We both have mixed feelings about the show, and we both come to it with very different lenses. So I think this is going to be an interesting conversation. You were much more focused on how the law and how Pyrie was working with his boss and how some of these things played out. And I was much more focused on the storytelling and the elements along those lines. So it'll be interesting to get our unique perspectives on this.
Are we supposed to give a spoiler alert?
Yeah, let's say spoiler alert. Now, I know it wasn't released over the pond, so I think it's just in the United States right now, maybe Canada. So for our listeners abroad that haven't seen it yet, yes, there will be spoilers. I'm sorry to say Brenda dies in the end.
I was really hoping when I got to the last episode that she might get away.
It's funny how that is, like knowing how it's going to end. You know how it's going to end from episode 1, and you still root for her, even though you know it's not going to end well for her.
Yeah, and I know that sounds like I'm just being funny when I say that, but there was honestly a big emotional part of me that really wanted her to get away, and I was being crushed at every step along the way when she's trying to get away, and she's got her sister telling her to stay. She's got church authorities telling her to stay. She's got everybody in the world telling her to stay. And I'm going, don't listen to them. Get the hell out of there.
When it made for some really compelling storytelling, because as the listeners, we know that she's making the wrong choices. We know that all of these decisions will eventually lead to her death, but they showed it in considerable detail, and it was so gripping because you wanted her to somehow escape. You wanted her to somehow change history, but that isn't how it ended.
I wanted it to be like Once Upon a Time in Hollywood.
Good movie.
We got 2 hours to cover 7 episodes.
Yeah, I think we might be able to do at least 1 or 2 in 2 hours.
We got to do all kidding. 7, though. No, seriously. If I went into the detail, I've watched this. I've watched it again in order to prepare for this podcast. And I will tell you that there's a lot that I did not pick up on the first time. This series does reward multiple viewings.
Yeah, there's a lot going on. There's a lot of like beautiful, like one-line zingers that are just so quotable and memorable. I wrote down a bunch of those. Like there's a lot to take from this show. I think both from a believing perspective and a non-believing as well, because they did a fairly good job of portraying some of the positive and negative aspects of the faith.
I think just about every kind of Mormon and even fundamentalist Mormon was represented somewhere in this series.
Oh, yeah. One of the complaints, at least speaking to some believing members, that I have heard is that they showed a lot of the temple, and they showed the temple garment and some of the rituals that have been previously taken out. I don't think you can tell the story accurately without depicting what they showed in the temple. And specifically, what I want to bring up is there's a 19th century short story writer. His name's Anton Chekhov. One of his main points that he would always tell.
Never heard of him. Did he have a cherry orchard or anything?
So Chekhov has this writing principle that he would tell all of his friends as they were trying to write. And it's this principle called Chekhov's gun. What he says is that if you show a gun in Act 1, it needs to be fired in Act 2. And so it's just this writing principle. It's you have to tell your audience what you're going to do without really telling them what you're doing. And the whole show, they're talking about blood atonement. Blood atonement is mentioned every single episode. But you can't fully understand what blood atonement is, especially if you've never been through the temple, if you don't actually show the ritual. I feel like they did it as tactfully and tastefully as they could. They didn't talk about any of the associating tokens and signs. They didn't go into any detail about anything that's discussed there. The only thing they did was show the promises and the penalties. From my perspective, you cannot tell this show, you cannot tell this story in a compelling way for the viewer to understand the murders without that knowledge. So if you don't come to the table as a member of the LDS Church or any of the offshoot branches of Mormonism, you are not going to understand why she was murdered the way she was murdered. You have to have that knowledge coming into this.
Right. And I agree with you about the penalty, especially the slitting of the throat. And this is in one of the episodes. We can get into that later if we have to, but this is basically the entire series like a movie at this point. Yes, the slitting of the throat, very poignant and foreshadowing with Brenda doing the sign of the slitting of the throat on her wedding day in 1982, I think it was. So a couple years before the murders in 1984. I think that she didn't quite understand that it's supposed to be with a thumb because she sort of does it with her finger and her forefinger and her thumb put together almost like she's unzipping her throat. But it's her first time through, so we can forgive her that much.
Yeah, I'm sure that she'll be forgiven. Now, I didn't go through. I went through after those were already removed. So the only times I have seen it has been in videos like this.
You don't know what you missed.
Oh, I do. I've done the research and it just kind of baffles my mind. But that's a conversation for another day.
This is another example, though. I want to use this. First off, let me tell you that I think this is a remarkable series, incredible acting, incredible directing. I think there were some places where the writing could have been tightened up, perhaps. And this is a good example because you mentioned that the only thing being shown from the temple was this penalty, but actually there's a flashback within the flashback. It sounds like we're in the book of Mosiah now, but there's within the flashback of going back to her first time through the temple, then she's talking to her sisters in the creation room, which obviously they reconstructed for this. And they use it as much as they possibly can, because I'm sure there was some expense involved. But, I think it's the creation room in the Salt Lake Temple. I've never been to that temple, but I've seen the pictures before.
It looked more like an Idaho temple.
Oh, really? Okay. So maybe it's an Idaho temple.
I've been to some of the Salt Lake ones and some of the Idaho ones. There were more motifs of like nature and like deer and elk and such in the Idaho temples. And so that's kind of what it was more reminiscent of. And if her parents lived up there, that would make more sense if she got married where her parents live.
Yes. Good point. However, in that flashback within the flashback, now she's talking to her sisters in the flashback and they're doing the temple sign. But then she flashes back to having the washing and anointing done on her. And I think this was very tempting to the filmmaker. By the way, let me preface this by saying that I always remember back when I was in drama class in college and our teacher, Jim Daniels, I hope I'm pronouncing his name right. Was it McDaniel? Anyway, Jim.
He'll probably forgive you.
I hope so. Anyway, he talked to us about, there are no right choices in acting and directing, by the way. There are not right choices and wrong choices. There are perhaps more effective choices and less effective choices. So it's not something about that's right or wrong. It's more different. So I'm not here trying to judge anything other than putting my opinion into it. And so this is just my opinion, and other people can have different opinions, and that's fine. So my opinion is that it's very tempting to want to cram so much into this series that it becomes a bit diffuse and it loses its focus. And I know it was tempting to want to put that in there, but the washing and anointing bit really doesn't support the theme of the movie, which is the violence. There's this weird, kind of, she almost touched my private parts, is what Brenda's telling her sisters. And she's shocked by it. And I get it. It's just that we have a limited amount of time in this series to tell a story. And this is one of the most painful things that I have to do on a limited basis with a podcast, or I'll have ideas that I want to share, but then I have to say, wait a second, that doesn't really support the theme of my particular podcast that I might be doing. It has to go on the cutting room floor. And those are very difficult choices to make. I think this might have been an example where that could have been left out, because what it ends up doing is not supporting the theme of her cutting her throat, which is, of course, the link between the ancient Mormonism and the violence associated with it and modern day Mormonism. There are these vestiges of the violence in the Mormon past that continue into 1984 with the penalties in the temple. There's a few other things that they do that I think are very good. But when you add in the part about her getting washed and anointed and her feeling uncomfortable about it, well, that may be a valid thing to have. It ends up detracting from the penalty, which is the main point, I think.
Yeah, I completely agree. I feel like they did a number of scenes that felt as though it were fan service. I don't know if that's a term that you're familiar with, but they, when you have a target audience, the main people that are gonna love and enjoy your show. You'll do a scene or show something that will make your audience cheer or root, but really does nothing for the story. Nothing compelling is actually happening. And that's kind of the vibe that I get from some of these scenes. They're appealing to this ex-Mormon community that's going to devour this show, but it doesn't do a whole lot for the overarching narrative. And in my opinion, I think that they should have cut some of these things and given more emphasis to some of the storylines that really needed an extra scene or two to be compelling. And we'll get there down the road, but specifically the storyline I'm referring to is the women's suffrage, where they're being oppressed by their husbands, leading up to the finale. And I felt like it wasn't as emotionally compelling as it could have been had they cut out some of these scenes and added some more scenarios that would have given more drive to these other women's stories.
Okay, very good. And I know that you had mentioned in our phone conversations leading up to today a character that you felt was somewhat superfluous that was given a good deal of time to, which is the fictional detective Pyrie, his mother.
I feel like the way that she was handled, it felt like her whole storyline, apart from episode 1 or 2, and in the first episodes of a show, you're always going to introduce a character. You're going to show them why they're unique, why you should care about this person. And having a mother with dementia is an excellent character background. It really makes you feel for his personal life in the first few minutes of actually getting to know him. But when you continue to have her in the story, she doesn't do very much for the actual narrative that they're trying to tell. And I feel like the rest of her storyline was just to get to the zinger in episode 3, or was it 4? When he's with the bishop, I think it's episode 3. Yes. So at the end of episode 3, he's with his bishop, and his bishop makes this point that, women struggle with their feelings more than men. And, we really shouldn't rely on drugs to handle our emotions or our mental health. And I feel like her whole storyline was just so that they could say that line. And all of the screen time she got was leading up to that. And I don't feel like that really did anything for the whole investigation with the Laffertys.
Right. And I agree with you on that. I thought that I didn't understand why she was important to the story And by the end of it, I'm still having the same question in my mind. There's also the difficulty that this is a cast of characters that is large. There are so many people to keep track of. And the first time through, I am having trouble myself keeping track of just the Laffertys, for crying out loud. They've got, the patriarch. By the way, what is the patriarch's name in this? Do you know? Did you ever find that out?
Ammon Lafferty.
No, it's not. Isn't that funny? Because I thought it was Ammon Lafferty too. And then I looked it up on the internet. His name is actually Watson. That's Watson Lafferty Sr.
Because on the IMDb for Under the Banner of Heaven, it says Ammon Lafferty.
Okay, well, I wondered about that because then I looked it up and I thought, did I get that wrong? Is he talking about Ron Lafferty? And it's Ron Lafferty's middle name, Ammon or something like that? So then I was correct the first time through that his name, the patriarch's name, is Ammon.
Yeah, in the show. But, according to your research, then that was not his real name.
Yeah, apparently it was Watson. Anyway,
regardless, not as Mormon of a name.
No, not at all.
But that sort of thing doesn't matter. But I can see making a change, trying to throw in kind of more of the LDS vibe to the characters.
Can I tell you another change that I thought was unusual was creating not only a fictional detective, which I get to be the guy who we're seeing this through all these events and going from his character arc of being a true believing Mormon to being, I guess, a PMO at the end. Big spoiler alert.
Yeah. That's kind of where it left off. And I have some mixed feelings about that too. And we can get to there in a sec, but keep going with what you're saying.
Right. And what was I saying? I'm still back on this Ammon thing. I need to just leave it alone because it just confused me after I looked it up and I thought I got it wrong. And he must have.
You were saying that there was another inconsistency or another change that bothered you.
Another change that bothered me. Oh, here's where I get to name drop. I was talking with Richard Dutcher the other day. No, I called him up because I had dinner with him a couple of weeks ago and I got to meet him and we got along just famously, I think. And we closed the restaurant down. We were there talking for 4 hours.
Oh, wow.
About movies and things like that. And he had said he was not watching this because his practice is to wait on a series like this until they're all released. Hang on a second here.
So he binges them.
Yeah, until they're all released and then he binges them. So the last one dropped last week. By the way, today's date is June 10th, 2022 that we're recording this for some reference. The last episode drops last week. And I called him up yesterday knowing we're going to be doing this podcast today. And I say, Richard, have you binged those yet? Because I wanted to pick your brain about them. And he goes, no, I haven't yet. And I said, well, could you watch them all today? And I'll call you at midnight tonight. He laughed too. He laughed too. No, that wasn't going to happen. But anyway, we'll talk about it sometime later, he and I.
For the listeners that aren't familiar with Richard Dutcher, one of his famous works is God's Army, and he's done a number of other movies, but he's a filmmaker.
Yes,
an indie filmmaker,
right? Who does films about? Who has done very successful films about Mormons and Mormonism?
Yeah.
Okay, so having said that. He was confused about why it was that they just didn't go with American Fork, which is the actual city in Utah where this happened, but instead created a fictional police department as well, which I think was East Rockwell.
Something like that. Yeah.
Yeah. And he knew that much about it. And he was saying, why do you want to come up with a fictional police department when, I mean, what is the point of it, right?
Yeah. Since it is historically based, I don't see why they couldn't do real places, real police departments. I mean, they're changing names, obviously, and they're taking liberties with what really happened in a number of places. But a detail like this, it doesn't really matter. So it's one of those like stylistic, like maybe they just wanted a different name than American Fork. I'm not sure. I have no idea why they would make a change like that.
I don't know either, but I'm sure that some thought process went into it that I'm not privy to, because obviously the director / writer, they're the same, I believe.
I believe so. Yeah.
Yeah. Came up with that decision. So maybe there was a political reason for it or something. I don't know. And by political, I just mean, not wanting to cross any lines or being able to access some other kind of, I don't know, police station, not have to have it be a real state. I have no idea why, but it was a curious thing. So anyway, we've got a fictional police detective and a fictional police detective's mother with dementia. And we've talked about different things that seem to detract from the overall thrust of the show. Can I tell you one of the things in episode 1 that bothered me? Okay. And I hope this is okay. By the way, let me also say Andrew Garfield, fantastic actor. I wish that he had had more to do in this show than look concerned and anxious, which was pretty much everything that he could do.
He was the top billed cast on the show. He's the showrunner, but I don't think he had the most lines in the show. And I don't think he had the most screen time in the show. He was used as a lens for the audience to see the whole story. And I think that was the purpose of his character. But I mean, you have Sam Worthington and Wyatt Russell, who played Ron and Dan Lafferty, and they had way more screen time than Andrew Garfield did. And then the Daisy Edgar Jones, she stole the show. She didn't have as much as
the actress who played Brenda.
Yes. Yeah. The actress who played Brenda. She probably had about as much screen time as Andrew Garfield in total in the show, but she had more lines and more compelling lines. Her storyline and her acting was superb. She stole the show, in my opinion. But as you said, Andrew Garfield, he just was contemplative and kind of like concerned the whole time, and all of like the acting chops that he brought to the table were far exceeded what was required for him in this role.
Right. And I did not expect that Andrew Garfield, who, by the way, is and will always be the best Spider-Man.
Oh, I 100% agree with you there. 100%.
I was watching the very final scene of the very final episode where he's out there at the lake watching the sunrise with his mother and his arm around her. And I got a total Aunt May vibe from that scene.
That's fantastic.
Well, anyway. So having said that, and the guy, I'm sorry, Sam Worthington did an incredible job. So did the gal who played Brenda, whose name you already mentioned.
Yeah, Daisy Edgar Jones.
She did an incredible job. And so did Gil, the guy who played Bill Taba, Pyrie's detective partner. The Pyrie.
Yes. Gil Birmingham is his name.
Yeah, he did fantastic.
I've got IMDb right here, so I've got all their names.
Perfect. They did so great. And I want to say that out of everything, I thought that there were so many wonderfully constructed, directed, and acted scenes in this series. And we'll talk about a few of them. I just felt like the sum total of the series didn't quite, the total of the entire series did not equal the sum of its parts.
Yes, that is an excellent way of putting it. I feel like they had the buildup was phenomenal. You and I had a conversation early on. I think we had seen 4 episodes, and you had a lot of complaints, and I was still like, doe-eyed, like loving where it was going, loving everything about it. I tend to ignore some of the inconsistencies, and I'll give allowances for things like that more than others maybe. But I was coming into the last few episodes really hopeful because I loved everything that they were doing, everything that the actors and actresses were doing in the show. But I feel like episode 7, they just could not stick the landing. They had everything set up to be a phenomenal miniseries, but there was some emotional drive that I felt was lacking in the story right at the very end.
It was like the last season of Game of Thrones.
Exactly.
So if we start go ahead.
I was just going to say, side note, if you loved Brenda, the actress that played Brenda, if you loved her acting, she has a movie coming out later this year that is going to be phenomenal. It's called Where the Crawdads Sing. So go check that out. Watch the trailer. It's going to be really very good. Oh,
I'm looking forward to that. That's the same actress.
It's the same actress. And she oh man, it's going to be really, really good. Like I love everything that she does. So she's awesome. And this movie is going to be really good. My wife is so excited for this movie.
Well, I am too, but just so you don't forget, the new Jurassic Park movie opens today.
I had a friend that watched it last night on opening night, and
No. Don't do the spoiler on me.
No spoilers. No spoilers.
Does it have dinosaurs in it?
I've heard there were dinosaurs, but I can't confirm or deny.
Yeah, in this movie, the dinosaurs are played by Jeff Goldblum, Laura Dern, and Sam, whatever that guy's name is. I can't remember.
That was good. That was pretty good.
Thank you. That wasn't too bad, was it?
All right. I interrupted you. I can't remember what we were saying.
Okay, let's go to the beginning, all right? Because a lot of the things that bothered me about this have to do with police work, all right? Because it seems
you have some knowledge of police work and the inner workings of the law, if I'm not mistaken.
I have a little bit. I've been an attorney practicing criminal law and working closely with police for over 3 decades. So yes,
so you know a little bit more than
I know a little bit. But my gosh, it's like there was no police protocol that they didn't violate somewhere during the course of this series, and I thought it was remarkable. But let me just tell you what I mean. Okay, first off, the opening scene, we've got Andrew Garfield. He's out in the lawn. He's playing with his kids. It's wonderful. We're seeing what a great Mormon dad he is, and what just a great dad he is. Right? He gets the call. His wife comes out and says, hey, you got a call. He takes the call. This is the report of the double murders, because that's where he goes after that. Now, there's 2 things about this. First off, I'm going to say the thing about the double murders. A lot is made during the first few episodes of Detective Pyrie trying to keep this story under wraps so it doesn't go public, that there's been a double murder in this little residential neighborhood in this little town of East Rockwell. Okay. Yeah. Who the hell called it in the first place? Who is it who's reporting this murder? Somebody found him.
It wasn't Alan, and it wasn't any of Brenda's family.
Right. Somebody found these bodies. Somebody reported it. And I'm just saying that the odds of being able to keep this quiet are unlikely. That's about the nicest way I can say it. There's no way it's going to be under wraps after this, because somebody found what was going on. Somebody reported it. They got police there. They got the tape up. I mean, this is a duplex, remember? There's a lady who lived right next door who sees Ron waiting at the door and later on reports about the car.
Yeah, I didn't realize it was a duplex until the last episode. I thought it was a house, and then doing some research, I'm pretty sure they actually lived in an apartment building. But then on the last scene, like, it shows that it's actually a duplex. I mean, there's no way the neighbors didn't hear anything or notice anything, at least, later on in the day when they come home and the door to their neighbor's house has been open for how many hours.
Right. So anyway, I just thought that was a little bit odd that he is managing to keep this a secret. And that's just part of the theme of the story, where he's trying to keep it from the press. And then finally it leaks out around episode 3 or 4, and we're off to the races again. But that was one thing. The other thing that drove me nuts is that Andrew Garfield, can I just use his name as an actor? Okay. Andrew Garfield gets this call. There's been a double murder. He is not only a member of the police department in the small town, which has a limited number of police officers. I think they said 18 at one point. He's in charge. The police chief has left for vacation to Yellowstone for a week, which we find out about. He's in charge. And even if he weren't in charge, it wouldn't make any difference. You get your ass over to the crime scene. All right. You don't take the time to change out of your jeans and your shirt that you've been playing around in the yard with your kids, and put on your suit and your white shirt and your tie. I understand getting your badge and your gun. Okay, that's fine. But he's taken all this time, and I'm going, what the hell are you doing? Get your ass to the crime scene. Okay. Now, the dead bodies don't care what you're wearing when you show up. But it is such common knowledge now. I think it's out there. The general public understands through TV shows and other things. The first several hours after a murder are the most critical, because, believe it or not, the people who are the murderers are not standing still waiting to be caught. They're on the move. All right. They are on the move. And statistically, if you do not catch a murderer within the first several hours after the crime, the odds of catching them go down dramatically. This is police stuff 101, right? This isn't like you have to have a lot of knowledge of it. I was talking with Richard Dutcher. I will drop his name as many times as I can during the course of this podcast. And he was aware of it, and he hasn't worked with police to my knowledge, right? But yeah, it's something that people know. And then that's not enough. Now that I'm sitting there shouting at the screen, get to the crime scene, quit changing your clothes. It doesn't make any difference. Now he's going to make another stop for
You don't need your hat to go and investigate.
Right. Now he's going to make another pause to have family freaking prayer.
Yeah.
And I'm just I would say pulling my hair out, except there's an obvious punchline to that.
On one hand, I totally believe that, though. The prayer thing, like I can totally see a devout Christian before they go to a crime scene, kneeling down and praying. Like I can see that. Maybe they wanted to have the visuals of the whole family kneeling in the first episode, which I can also understand. But in practice, it probably would have happened while he was driving. This would have been a conversation. He's, police light on, sirens blare, and driving down the street and praying while he's en route to the crime scene.
Right. And so this is another thing that this will happen throughout the series, where it's only over the course of 4 or 5 days in the series between the murders and catching Ron and Dan in Reno. Actually, I think it's Las Vegas where they end up because it's at the Circus, right?
Yes, I think it was Las Vegas.
That part was just a little bit confusing. There's part in Reno, part in Las Vegas, but it's the Circus. And I know from watching, what was it, Vegas back in the 80s, probably when this freaking show was going on. Do you remember that TV show?
No, I was born in 1986.
Yeah, well, okay. There's such a thing as reruns.
But I'm sure some of the listeners will know it.
Anyway, there was about a detective, Dan Tana or something, and it was at the Circus, and Tony Curtis was like the owner of the so anyway. But it was at the Circus, and that's where they end up finding him, finding both of them. So, but this is a constant theme, is that you have Andrew Garfield, who continually is talking about, we've got to get going. If we don't make a right move, blood's going to be spilled. We've got to get going on this. We've got to do this. And he's saying these lines, which are the correct things to say. And yet throughout these few days, 5 days, he is doing anything but that. He's going off and he's attending a meeting with his bishop for their kids' baptismal interview.
For the baptism, yeah, that was episode 3 is when they were doing that.
Yeah, and then he wants to talk to his bishop some more after that about blood atonement and his mom, and she wants to kill herself. Is that okay? Like, he really needs some instruction on that. No, it's not okay, but she can have medication, right? So, and then he's just meeting with.
Well, it's not recommended, but women struggle with their feelings more, is what he said.
Well, yeah, and they struggle with their feelings more. And by the way, you wouldn't believe the number of women in this congregation who are on medication. Andrew Garfield. Yeah, I thought that was good. Yeah, blabbermouth.
I know, right?
But it's Taba, Bill Taba, his companion, like they're on a mission. His detective, right? His detective partner. He's the one who acts like a cop throughout this whole thing. And he's continually telling Andrew Garfield, go home, get some sleep, be with your family. And I'm going, what are you talking about? He should be sleeping at the station for maybe a few hours when he has to have it. But this is something where he's not going to be home. He's not going to be talking to all these people. He's not going to be going to church on Sunday, right? He goes to church in that episode, and and I'm just wondering why it is that he's doing this, because I keep reminding myself, these two killers are still out there, and they still have their list of new victims, which is part of the drama that they're trying to address. And he's going to church with his family, and I'm going, what are you doing?
Yeah, I think this goes back to the fan service that we were talking about. They're trying to do this love letter to ex-Mormons, and the whole point of that interaction in the church was to highlight, and this was episode 4, if I'm not mistaken, or maybe 5. The whole purpose of that interaction was for the bishop's wife to have this guilt trip over them delaying the baptism of their daughters. And the line that she said was basically, if they want to be in heaven with their daughters, they need to make sure that they get baptized. And it was kind of this guilt trip to pressure them into actually going ahead with the baptism.
Yeah, and that's where we find out that apparently Pyre's wife has already had a couple of children. I can't remember how many. Was it 2 or 3 who have already died, maybe in childbirth?
Yeah, they I don't think they explicitly said if it was miscarriages or stillborns, but that was part of what was kind of held over their heads. Like, don't you want to be in heaven in the eternities with your children that have already passed? And it was just a really unhealthy thing to say. And again, I feel like that's really compelling storytelling, but it detracts from the murder investigation. I mean, that sort of an interaction, I think, is really interesting. It's something that many of the viewers can relate to, but it has nothing to do with finding out who killed Brenda and Erica.
Small point on chronology.
Yeah.
All right. So we find out in episode 7 that 4 days have passed since the murder. Okay. I mean, that specifically, we get an absolute pin on that 4 days because he's talking about it's been 4 days since the murder, and Andrew Garfield's comparing that with when things are happening with Diana, Ron's wife, right? Who's now in Florida.
Yeah. To track her down. She's gone missing.
Yeah, and becomes this other huge distraction, I think. But I went back and I checked, and in 1984, Pioneer Day, which is, of course, July 24th, and you can double check me on this right now. I'd appreciate it, actually, if you did.
Okay. While you're talking, I'll go look it up.
Was on a Tuesday. So 1984, July 24th is on a Tuesday. 4 days after that, it's going to be Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday. So Saturday is going to be 4 days after July 24th. So that'll be July 28th, I presume, in 1984. The problem is that by the time they get to episode 7, where they're 4 days out from the murders, Pyre has already gone to church on Sunday and had that encounter with the bishop's wife outside the chapel.
July 24th, 1984 was a Tuesday. So 4 days later would put them on Saturday.
And they wouldn't have gone to church yet.
No. I mean,
so that is such a small point. I'm doing that mainly just to show that I really did try and crunch this down and try and do some investigation. That is not a huge thing in my mind.
I feel like the motive for some of these scenes was to highlight the harm and some of the things that people say within these religious communities that I think is important, but has nothing to do with the story that they're telling.
Right. And I think it's at the end of episode 1 where they finally locate Robin Lafferty.
Mm-hmm.
And they locate him. And, I'm not going to go through all the details of how it is that they locate him, although I wrote them all down. The thing is that they find him at a hotel on the second floor with his whole family. They're led there by somebody because they put out an APB on guys with beards.
Yeah.
They get a call from this convenience store guy, and he says, yeah, there's one over there, and he's in this motel. So they bring the entire East Rockwell Police Department with them, which is apparently 18 guys, and they've got Pyre and they've got Taba with them. And they all go up the landing, and they all go through the front door. And, of course, then they find out that Robin has jumped out the back window and is heading across the field. And I'm just thinking, why? Okay. Anytime police go to arrest somebody in the front, they're going to put other police in the back. I'm just saying, because guess what? Sometimes when police come in the front, people don't want to get caught and they jump out the window or they go out some other way. And that's why Police 101 is, you station officers at any potential exit points while the other officers are going through the front so that, hey, the bad guy gets caught. But they didn't do this here. So he jumps out the window, starts booking across the field. No problem. They find him anyway, right? They find Robin.
Yeah.
And then a very strange thing happens, I think, which is that Taba's there, Pyre's there, and Taba now gets all concerned about Pyre and his family because Taba's saying, this guy knows you from church. You need to get back to your family right now because they could be in danger. And Pyrie does it. And I'm left scratching my head because they're putting Rob and Lafferty in custody right then. They're arresting him. They're taking him down to the station. He doesn't have an opportunity to contact his family and say, hey, Jeb Pyrie arrested me, so go get his family. So I was kind of scratching my head about that one. I didn't understand how that made a lot of sense. Anyway, if we're talking about police work, so once again, Detective Taba is the police officer, and he does say to Pyrie that he's a recent transplant from Las Vegas, apparently.
Yeah, he has just moved up from Las Vegas.
And he's never been a Mormon, but he's the one who has all the experience with murders and murder investigations. And Pyrie doesn't, because they've never happened in this town. Right?
Yeah, they made a point of explicitly saying that.
Yeah, and so I'm also wondering why it is that they mention that the chief is out on vacation at Yellowstone for the next week. And I'm just sitting there thinking, okay, so why isn't anybody contacting the chief of police about this double murder that just happened in his little town? And I was talking with somebody about this shortly after I watched the first 2 episodes. And they were saying, well, they didn't have cell phones back then. And I said, yeah, but they did have a Forest Service. And we know that Taba contacts the Forest Service, or Pyrie does, to find out about those guys up in the mountain with the beards blowing things all to heck, right? And Pyrie goes up there in episode 2. Not Pyrie, but Taba goes up there in episode 2 by himself, right? And so we know that you can contact the Forest Service. And I would presume they'd be able to contact the Forest Service over in Yellowstone as well. And then, as if to highlight the idea that the chief of police would actually leave contact information, so he could be contacted, I don't know, in case there was a double murder in his town, in case something happens, right? He's the chief of police. So he's going to leave a contact number where he can be contacted. And he's going to check that. And as if to underscore this problem with the storyline, I don't think it's meant to underscore the problem. Maybe it is. As if to underscore the problem with the storyline, you have the patriarch Lafferty. I'll just say patriarch Lafferty, if it's Ammon or Watson or whatever, and his wife, right? They're leaving on their mission to Louisiana. And this is in episode 2 now. But in episode 2, patriarch Lafferty talks to Dan Lafferty, who he has selected to be the head of the family in spite of the fact that Ron's the oldest. And guess what he does? He gives him a phone number. And he says, he gives him a phone number. It's on paper. And he says, there's not a lot of phones in Louisiana. So this is the number of the nearest ward building. Okay. So you can contact me, and only do it in case of emergency. That's actually what he tells him. And so we're to think that the patriarch Lafferty is going to do this when the chief of police does not. So that was strange. And I thought, why are you guys not even trying to contact the chief of police? Because I can guarantee you, when he gets back in a week's time and finds out that you haven't contacted him, he's not going to be happy. You're going to have a lot of explaining to do. But then he does show up within a week. Okay, this is in a later episode. He does show up in a week, and there's a comment, I think it's made by Pyrie, about, thanks for coming back early.
Yeah. So maybe they did reach out?
Yes, but it's not made clear.
Yeah, there's no point made of them actually reaching out to him. I think narratively they had to have the police chief away so that Pyrie could be the one to confront the church leaders, the stake president specifically, because the stake president comes in and he's trying to have the police release the Laffertys because they're trying to preserve the name of the church. If you have the police chief there, suddenly you have to introduce this whole police chief character. You have to have a reason, like the whole conflict that they're establishing for Jeb's character doesn't matter if the police chief is there. If Jeb is the one making the decision whether or not they can be released, then there's better drama for his character arc. So they had to write the police chief out. They had to get him away from the scene so that Jeb could be the one to make that decision, because it was it was one of his first steps towards actually differentiating himself and his work from his religion. Because up until that point, like you said, he's kneeling down and praying before he goes and to the investigation. Like he's very devout, he's very orthodox. But then suddenly, through these things that he's seeing and through the things that Alan has been telling him, it comes to a point where he branches off from what his priesthood leader is telling him to do. But if the police chief is there, you can't have that scene. It doesn't work. It doesn't happen.
True, but he's in Yellowstone. You can still call him and say, "Get your ass back here," and it's going to take him a while.
Yeah, instead of saying, let's not call the police chief, you could have the phone conversation. Hey, we've had this double homicide. Oh, I'm coming back as soon as I can. It's going to be 2 days before I can get there. I mean, you could write that in and have it make more sense. But I can see why they did it. Their execution, I would have done differently if I were the writer.
Right, because at least for me, it jumps out at me because I'm thinking, are these guys trying to get fired? So, and I'm trying to take notes on who is who in this thing because it's this large cast of characters. I finally got the Laffertys down, I think, and then I got their wives down, I think, right? I mean, you could actually have a trivia question based upon the number of people here. And the stake president comes in, and Tob is talking about this guy coming in, and he says, look, it's Robert Wagner. And I'm writing down the name Robert Wagner as the name of the stake president. And then I find out, no, it's not. He's just making a joke that he looks like Robert Wagner. Actually, his name, his actual name is, when he introduces himself, I think is Martin Ballard.
Okay.
So they go ahead, not Melvin Ballard, by the way, but Martin Ballard.
I feel like they had to make those decisions to get Pyrie as the decision maker for those scenes. Because if he's not, then it doesn't matter.
Right. Can I bring up one other thing about police work that has me confused? Because I was watching episode 7 and trying to rewatch it last night. Actually, finally fell asleep. I've been watching a number of other episodes before that, but I rewatched it this morning. All right. So it's fresh in my mind. And I don't understand why it is in episode 7 that Bill Taba, the detective who actually acts like a detective. And of course, once again, he tells Jeb, go home, go to your get some sleep. I will do the stakeout on Sandy's apartment. Now, Sandy is the gal at the Circus, who's the waitress who has fallen in with Ron and Dan Lafferty. They know about the connection. He is outside of Sandy's apartment to stake it out during the night. And we see him sitting there. In fact, he flips open his Zippo and lights up a cigarette, and he's watching the apartment. And he's watching the apartment while Ron Lafferty, who, for whatever reason, has not changed his shirt since the murder.
4 days later, he must have been pretty ripe by that point.
You would think so. Yeah. And carrying evidence around on your body is probably not the best idea. But, not all people do the best idea. Okay. So I'm just saying that's a reality. So, but he's walking up there. He's still got the same shirt on. And Taba sees him walk into Sandy's apartment. And he doesn't do anything. And I'm shocked that this guy who in episode 2 goes running off into the woods after these kids who are obviously trying to lure him and do it successfully. And he falls in that little pit, right? Which thankfully there weren't any punji sticks at the bottom of. So he just hurts his leg, right? But he keeps going. And this is his character that's been established in episode 2. But now he just sits there. He doesn't call in. He doesn't do anything. And so there's nothing that happens there except he watches Ron Lafferty go into Sandy's apartment. And then later on, they have to go through this whole thing of catching them at the casino. And this is especially confusing because Taba tells Pyrie in episode 7, Pyrie is just so focused on rescuing Diana, who's now in Florida. And apparently jumping at shadows. I mean, she's very scared. We can understand that. But she jumps at this. She jumps at that. She grabs the kids. They're on the videotape at the convenience store. They're running. And so obviously Ron Lafferty must be in Florida trying to blood atone Diana.
Yeah.
But he's not. He's never there. He was never in Florida. Instead, they end up finding, his right before they fly off to Florida. I'm going, what are you doing? What are you doing? You've got Pyrie and Taba, the two detectives who are investigating this case. And they're trying to find these guys, right? And they think that Ron is in Florida. Okay, well, we know that the phones work because they call that detective in Florida who's a female, right? And it kind of surprises Pyrie. But she's the one who acts as really super professional throughout this whole situation, I think. And yeah, why would you be flying to Florida to find Ron Lafferty when you could send a picture? This is what actually police agencies do.
Send a picture. This is the man we're looking for. He's the one that we're worried is coming after Diana.
Right. And that would, if they went over there, that's fine. If they're only after Ron, maybe. And if they really know that Ron is there, maybe. But it's much faster to actually make a phone call than catch a flight to Florida. And thank God they're on their way to fly to Florida. And then they find out, Ron Lafferty's green Impala was just spotted. Where was it? In Wyoming?
Yeah, something like that. They had ditched it along the way with their two friends.
Right. And actually, so they go there and they all go up there. I don't see any police going in the back, but that's okay because nobody runs out the back again. So they go up to this house in Wyoming and they find the two guys, the Rick and the Chip and the Rick, right? The two
I don't recall their names, but it was the two friends that were only loosely associated with either the church and this school of prophets. Their motivation for being there, totally escaped me.
Well, the story was, and there were 4 people in the car. The story was that these two individuals, after the School of Prophets broke down, that Ron and Dan started trying to recreate it by proselytizing new people.
Gotcha.
And that Sandy was one of those at the circus, and that Rick and Chip were 2 of the others. That they're trying to get together into this new school of the prophets. So that they do explain that. And once again, going back over it and really trying to pay attention and take notes, I found that many of the questions that I had the first time through actually did get resolved the second time through. A big question I had, which was confusing to me the first time through, is when Dan starts practicing polygamy. And his wife, Matilda, they've got these 2 girls. And then Dan he's playing with them, tickle, if you know what I mean, in the bedroom. And then he starts talking about marrying them. And I'm going, what are you talking about? You're going to marry your own daughter? And I'm starting to think, is this your own daughter? Or is this, or who are these girls?
She was not his first choice. He wanted to marry her sister, but settled, I think is the word that they use in the story, that he settled for Matilda, and she already had a few children, and those are the kids that is the girl that he marries polygamously.
Yeah, she has 2 girls. And this is what I meant by going back and watching it again, because she does say that explicitly in the first episode. Matilda does talk about her 2 daughters and this marriage to Dan not being her first relationship. And that's one of the reasons why she's like tainted goods, right? Because she's been married before, obviously been sexually active, got 2 kids to prove it. And so they are her daughters and Dan's step daughters.
Yeah.
Okay. So that's what I mean when going back, I can see that they're setting things up. Can I mention something else? Not to take over your entire show. Okay. So some really interesting things that I started seeing had to do with the way that Taba becomes a role model or a teacher to Pyrie.
Yeah, he fills that sage archetype for Pyrie, where he's whenever Pyrie has a question or a problem, it's this wise counsel that he gets from his Paiute friend.
Yes, and don't say Tonto.
No.
Okay, don't do that. No, but he really is a very, very strong character, and he's the one with the experience. He's the one who acts like a detective, except that in the first couple of scenes, this isn't really an except that. And in the first couple of episodes, we have Taba, who has been specifically directed by Pyrie to not notify Brenda's family about the fact that she's been murdered, and also her daughter, her 15 or 14-month-old daughter. It changes depending upon the accounts I read, but it's right around there. And, it's just remarkable to me because that is so against protocol. And Andrew Garfield is coming up with a reason for it, which he says, before I talk to them, I want to know all the answers because I don't want to have to talk to them twice.
Yeah.
And I'm just thinking, what are you talking about? You think you're somehow getting away with just talking to this family once? And by the way, you've got no real leads right now. Why wouldn't you be talking to the murder victim's family to see what they might know and what leads they might have toward a suspect?
I think for scenes like this, and I've said it a number of times, but it's the narrative driving the logic of the story. Had Pyrie met with them day one, or day two even, he hasn't gone through the steps of his faith crisis, if you will. He hasn't had any chance to deconstruct the religion yet. So when these letters implicate a member of the 70, he's not going to believe that. He's going to side with the church because that's where he's coming from. It's not until later on in the storyline where he has defied a stake president, where he has defied, the council to maintain the good name of the church. I mean, he's taking these steps and he's slowly shifting his view of the church. Had he done that day one, he does not suspect foul play in the church, and you suddenly have a whole different story. For a decision like that, it's narrative driving the logic. There's no other way to explain it.
Good point. So going with something that I do see happening that is very intentional, I think that's very interesting in the story, is that Taba, he gets over to, I think it's Robin's house, and they got stuff that's burning, They're trying to find Robin. This is before they encounter him at the hotel and arrest him. Right? Robin Lafferty. And so he sees that stuff. He calls Pyrie, tells him what's going on, makes a comment about most good Mormons don't go to Disneyland with, leaving a fire in the backyard and fresh food or whatever it was in the dumpster. But then he goes directly against Pyrie's orders. And from Robin's house, he makes another phone call to Brenda's dad. And he advises the family that Brenda and their granddaughter are dead. And so Taba doesn't get back to the station before Pyrie's been contacted by Idaho police about it. And now he's really pissed at Taba for violating his direct order. And so they have a confrontation, and there's a little bit of racism talked about, by Taba, and which I thought was a little much, but it's okay. Only because he's doing it directly to Pyrie, who I think he understands doesn't feel that way.
I really liked their relationship. I liked the banter between the two characters. And so I feel like whether or not he understood that maybe Pyrie had some latent or unconscious racism, I think he did care for Pyrie and he understood him.
Yeah, I think so too. But the main thing isn't that confrontation. The main thing is that Taba goes against Pyrie's direct orders in contacting the family, which sets up and serves as an example for Pyrie to go against his chief's direct orders about not mentioning anything about fundamentalist Mormons being part of their investigation when they have the press conference. And of course, Pyrie, he does get pressed. He's not going to say it at first because he's got direct orders from his police chief. Don't mention anything about fundamentalist Mormons because, the world doesn't understand the difference between us, the true Mormons, and those crazy fundamentalist Mormons. And they're going to think it's the same thing.
Which I have never understood that. A side note, like I get the motive for not wanting people to research some of the history and the motive for fundamentalist Mormonism, but the idea that you can't say that there's another branch of the church, like just never has made sense to me. Like, why can't you say that's not us? That's these other guys. Like
the ones with the beards.
Yeah, that doesn't sully the name of the church at all. Like that just does not make sense to me and never has. When I was a believer and on my mission and other times when people confronted me with something like that, it was such an easy explanation. It was like, no, that's not us actually. And then you can explain why. Like it's such an easy conversation. Like that just never has made sense to me.
Right. So then, of course, he does that. And I thought that was nice because it shows that there's a connection there. There is storytelling that's going on There's foreshadowing. There's also this idea of Taba playing the role model, that even though he pisses Pyrie off by going against his direct order, now that gives Pyrie the cojones to go against his direct order. And of course, within the Mormon context, that has a lot of meaning. It's within the context of the police, which has its own hierarchy, but it also spills over, I think, into the church, which has its own hierarchy as well.
Yeah.
And then, unfortunately, I'm sorry. Did you have a thought about that, Mr. Rameumptom Ruminations, whose show this allegedly is?
It's all good. My shows are pretty short usually, so I have things to say, but probably not as much as you.
Well, you know what happens, right? I mean, what are we all set up for now after Pyrie does that and just like publicly kicks his chiefs in the nuts, right? Except nobody else knows that he's given him this directive except the chief and Pyrie and Taba.
And Taba heard it. And they had a really like tender moment right after that scene where Pyrie has just stood up to his boss and Taba, like, they have this really sweet moment. I think I wrote it down. Let me see. Was that episode 4 or 5?
Oh, well, I could look it up, but you mean the one, pardon my language, but I'm goddamn proud of you?
Yes. Yeah. I like that just brought a tear to my eye. Like, in so many of their interactions, they're such different people, but they see each other more clearly than anybody else. And they're okay with their differences and they respect each other's differences. And I thought their interactions were the best part of the whole show, at least for me.
And, you know, I said that at first, too. I believe that it's certainly one of the strongest parts of the whole show. And I would have said that their relationship is the strongest part. And maybe it is. It's a matter of opinion.
Of course.
But then I kept thinking about Brenda.
Yes. Her acting was like knockout performance, like just amazing.
Yes. And she got to do so much to show how good she was, how strong she was. Oh, and by the way, the press conference, right, gets tied back into Jacob, the one who has the mental problems, the Jacob Lafferty, right? I think that when Ron is withholding medical care from his dad and causing him to die.
That's right. Yes, he's making reference to the fact that they did the exact same thing to Jacob. And that's why Jacob has a handicap as an adult.
I think there was a problematic birth going on.
Oh, was that it?
I thought so. Once again, it's hard to understand Patriarch Lafferty at this point because he's so debilitated and on his deathbed, right?
Well, you got to watch with subtitles. That way you don't miss any of the words.
Oh, shoot, subtitles. Why didn't I think of subtitles?
I don't watch anything without subtitles. I don't know. Something bothers me. If I can't understand some of the dialogue, I just get really irritated. So I have to watch with subtitles, even if I've got, volume loud enough to hear.
You know what I hate about subtitles? When there's something clever or a joke that's going to be said and you read it before the punchline is given, and it just kind of makes it not funny.
No, I can understand that.
But he brings back Dan's journal to the police station in episode 7. Jacob does. And then Pyrie makes it clear he did it because he saw the press conference on TV.
Yeah.
And I thought it was sweet that Jacob was talking about, Brenda being his angel. Because, yeah, she was his angel. She was his angel. And you know something? She was also Matilda's angel, Dan's wife.
Yes.
And that's why watching it this.
And Diana, her character played that savior archetype role for everybody in the Lafferty family. And it was really well done. And I love how they did her story and bringing it in with Jacob calling her an angel was really sweet at the end there.
Yeah, I thought it was very sweet too. It did piss me off at Matilda, though, for giving her up, for helping Diana move. Now, I know Matilda, she's under a lot of pressure. Matilda, you're under a lot of pressure down here. So I understand that in that scene, right, where she reluctantly, but she gives up Brenda in the move of Diana and saying, well, Brenda planned the whole thing. And I just thought, she
was there too. And
she was there too. She sort of left herself out of that story. Right. But so I understand her doing that, but still it made me angry.
Yeah.
With her that Brenda had been so good to her throughout everything. And then, she just cracks like a nut and throws her under the bus, knowing that she's putting Brenda's life in danger because they sent Matilda over to give her that warning.
Yeah. Well, that's like, I feel really conflicted with Matilda's character and the actress, Chloe. I don't know how to pronounce her last name, Chloe Pirrie or Pyrie. It's actually spelled Pirrie. Anyway, I think she did a great job in the role, but I don't know that the way it was written was compelling, at least for me as the viewer. I think she was done. Her character was done dirty in the story. In the end, spoiler alert, her part in the climax is this, salvation moment. It's this redemption moment of Diana coming to rescue her out of polygamy. But leading up to this, she has been a defender of their practices. She's pointing the gun at Brenda, or pointing the blame at Brenda for moving Diana. She's warning Brenda that they're going to kill her. She's acting as a confidant to these bad guys. And for me, there was not a compelling switch, or at least there was nothing to me that indicated that she was conflicted at all by these decisions. And in order for them to have this redemption arc for her, you have to have that. You have to show that the character is conflicted in order for me to have any sort of emotions about her being rescued. And so that was one of my biggest complaints with the climax, is they really dropped the ball on giving her a compelling redemption arc. And honestly, all it would have taken would be an extra scene or two of her showing that she's conflicted about this, showing that she wants out but doesn't know how, showing that she's being oppressed and doesn't know how to escape this oppression. I mean, that storyline is one of the most compelling ones that they could tell in all of this, but they just didn't give it the screen time that it deserved or that it needed for it to be a compelling climax, because they gave it so much screen time right at the end of the show, but they did nothing to build up to that.
What do you think about the scene where she helps her daughters escape from the house when she knows that Dan's going to marry them?
Yes. So that's the one time where you do see some internal conflict, but that's before she's siding with them on all of these other issues. That's right. Before she has. So she does get them to escape. She lets them escape, but that's when she hasn't really accepted it. That's before her scene where they're driving and Dan is telling her about polygamy and telling her that that's what they're going to do. And they're speeding and they get pulled over and they have that whole interaction.
A great scene, by the way.
Oh, fantastic.
One of those wonderful scenes.
Yes. Amazing. That scene was really well done. But that whole escape, while it happened chronologically before, the way it was told in the story, the escape took place before they had the setup. So to an extent, she's already accepting polygamy on one hand, but then rejecting it for her kids. But then as it goes down the road, I mean, there are these other girls that are introduced into it that just, they get screen time for one episode and they're never really mentioned again, but they're told as wives of these guys.
The three girls from Canada.
Yes.
Vancouver, BC, which is a nod to the the Fundamentalist Mormon group that exists there.
They show her character leading up to the climax being complicit and helping Ron and Dan. And for me, for that rescue and redemption, for that to be compelling, you have to show her conflicted throughout the entire time. And I didn't get that.
Okay.
But that's just my opinion. And, you're welcome to disagree.
Well, that's fine. I mean, this is why it's fun to talk about these things and listen to other people's insights. By the way, I don't want to leave that press conference.
Yeah, you can keep going.
And Tava saying, excuse my language, but I'm goddamn proud of you, right? What is a thing that we are all expecting to have happen that never happens?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure where you're going with that.
Let me put a finer point on it. Pyrie has just disobeyed a direct order from his chief of police, who's standing right there when he disobeys the order and says, fundamentalist Mormons, right?
Yeah, for his boss to come down on him.
There's no payoff.
Yeah.
There is never a confrontation scene about that.
Yeah, I didn't think about that.
I kept wondering when the hell the police chief is going to come in, barging in, blam, stuffing the door and saying, what the hell do you think you were saying out there?
if I can change gears a little bit, I focused on some of the things that I didn't like. I want to talk about some of the things that I actually really appreciated with the cinematography of the show. One of the struggles that a show like this will run into when they're trying to depict a faith crisis is, how do you portray visually something that happens completely internally? How do you put on the screen in a compelling way for the viewer to see that Pyrie is going through a faith crisis? And I think that the editors, cinematography, director, they did a fantastic job of this. What I'm referring to is, when in these conversations between Alan and Pyrie, when they're talking, they kind of jump around in maybe a little bit of an unrealistic way, but they jump around between telling Brenda's story and the events leading up to her murder and telling church history. And they're going into the events of church history as they relate loosely to the events that are happening around Brenda. The brilliant thing that the director has done here is they do really sharp cuts. And what I mean by that is, they'll transition between the present, they'll transition from that to Brenda's story, then transition immediately to Joseph Smith's story, then back to the present, then back to Brenda, then back to the present. And they're jumping around quite a bit. And intermixed in these are scenes of Jeb Pyrie, and he's got really concerned looks on his face, and they're showing in a really compelling way how he's making these connections between the stories. And it's done so masterfully, because typically when you do a transition from scene to scene, you'll have it really smooth, it'll be easy on the eyes. But these scenes that they're doing, they're jumping so sharp that it's almost jarring, and they do it in this beautiful way to portray this faith crisis. And in my mind, like, that is such an excellent way to portray visually this completely internal conflict, by jumping really sharp cuts between all of the things that he's thinking about.
Yeah, and I thought that was interesting too. And actually, I didn't notice it as much as when you pointed it out to me, because we talked about this before.
Yeah.
And I thought that was interesting. And you mentioned the part about the first vision kind of thing.
Yeah. So I haven't said that yet. I'll mention it here too. There was another really interesting thing. And in storytelling, one of my favorite theorists on storytelling, well, he was more mythologist, but Joseph Campbell, he has this hero's journey. One of the things that he talks about at the beginning of everybody's story is a threshold crossing, going through the forest, passing, leaving the village, leaving what you already know. Whether you believe Joseph Smith's story is true or not, the grove, the sacred grove, is a threshold crossing. And it's him going into the forest. He's leaving this world that he knows. He receives this inspiration, and he comes back out of the forest a different person. And in episode 3, they have a really compelling, what they do is they show a lot of the imagery from the first vision, but they do it in a way to highlight the changes that are going to happen very quickly to Jeb. So as Jeb is going through this forest, this is the middle of episode 3. So at this point, Taba he's been injured. He fell in that hole that we mentioned earlier. He's being held up. There's guys with guns. At least he thinks there's multiple people with guns. And so Pyrie is going through this forest. He's crossing this threshold. And as they do it, they pause. They don't freeze frame, but they stop. He's standing by a tree for a sec. And then there's a lens flare right over his head. And you have this pillar of light. It isn't descending, but you have this pillar of light connecting from the sun directly to Pyrie's head. And it was this beautiful callback to the first vision as a way to say, here is Jeb. He's having his threshold crossing. And he goes out of this forest to this other side, and he is confronted with fundamentalist Mormonism. And it's put in his face and in his world in such a way that he comes out of this forest a completely different person. He sees the religion differently after he leaves that encounter with which brother was it there? Was it Sam? Yes, it was Sam Lafferty. So it was Sam Lafferty and a number of the children that were there. He leaves that interaction. Culkin. Yes, Culkin. It was Rory Culkin. Yeah, little brother of Macaulay Culkin.
And he's never going to escape that, I think.
Oh, I know, right? So yeah, so it was this really beautiful cinematography moment where they've used the imagery of the first vision to highlight the fact that this is Pyrie's threshold crossing, where he's going to go and he's going to learn things that will change his world forever. And I thought that was such a beautiful way to portray that. And it wasn't by accident. I mean, that was very deliberate, the way that they had that right over his head.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. And I also noticed that they did a similar kind of thing with Patriarch Lafferty back when Dan is running for mayor and he's got the gypsy girl in the alley and the other people are around and, oh, she's working her will over me and, oh, she's making me kiss her and all this kind of stuff. And then Patriarch Lafferty comes in there and breaks up the party and he's doing his thing, right? But right behind him, right behind his head is the sun, which is doing this like angelic divine glow right over his shoulder as if he represents God.
Yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah, so I thought there was a lot of beautiful cinematography in this. One of the things that's I think that was the most haunting was in episode 1, where you've got finally after Pyrie gets his suit on and has family prayer, he heads out in his car and it's at dusk, heading up that lonely road. I thought that was haunting.
Mm-hmm. Great visuals throughout the entire series.
Yeah, and Brenda at the beauty pageant, there's a lot of foreshadowing. It was like I could see a lot of work put into the setup and the foreshadowing. Brenda's at that, that lame beauty pageant, right? And we know, because, they're not all Miss America pageants, right? They start somewhere on a local level, and that's where she is in Idaho. And she's singing the song from The Rose that was very popular at the time by Bette Midler. But she's singing the lyrics, "Some say love, it is a razor that leaves your soul to bleed."
Yeah.
And I picked up on that the second time through. Also, when she's talking to her dad about she wants to go to BYU and study journalism because she wants to read the news, which sounds like kind of an English expression. A news reader is what we would call the reporter or whatever on TV, or the anchor person. And then she says to her dad, "Yeah, I'm going to be on television." And my comment there I made was, yeah, she is, but not in the way she thinks.
Wow.
So can we also mention this wonderful scene with Brenda at the studio?
Yes.
Now, that was a fantastic scene. And you know what I'm talking about. Everybody who's seen it knows what I'm talking about.
Where they lock the door and... Mm-hmm.
Yeah, yeah. And he goes, she wants to, try and be on the news. Why is it always men? Why is it always men and not women? And the response, by the way, this was confusing to me because she's at BYU. She went to BYU to study journalism. And I'm taking from this that she is at BYU as part of her journalism course, her TV broadcasting course. And they've got a studio there. And this is a professor who's talking with her, right? This is the impression I get. And he goes up there. Let me finish that thought. It was confusing because other people thought, well, no, this is a real studio.
No, I thought she was a student still.
I thought so too. But then in another scene later on, you have Ron and Dan Lafferty at home watching her on TV, doing the news with that same background.
Perhaps they were broadcasting BYU, like BYU News or something.
And that would tie it together. That would tie it together because, of course, they would do broadcasts because that's part of the deal. So anyway, so if this is a professor, he's Mormon, and, she wants to have him ask the people upstairs if she can read the news and not just be doing the stuff behind the scenes, right? And he says, okay, well, let's give it a try. And she says, great. She's sitting behind the desk, the news desk, and he goes up the steps, and then he closes the windows, pulls the black drapes over the window so there's not ambient light coming into the studio. Makes sense. And then he locks the door. And as soon as he locked the door, I said, oh, you got to be kidding me. Here it goes. Here it goes. And of course, there's a reaction from her as well. And then he comes down there and he says, okay, do this. And she reads something and he says, now give me a big smile. And so she gives him a smile, says, oh, you have such a pretty smile. And he walks up to her and he's been like coming on to her so bad. And then she totally turns the tables on him.
Masterfully.
Oh, and she does such a good job of it. And this was excellent writing. This was excellent everything, in my opinion. But basically saying, yeah, well, I hope that you'll tell the people upstairs that it would be a good idea for me to read the news because, if I told them that you lock the door on me when we are here alone in the studio, that they might find that newsworthy.
It's
And
such a great line.
he's just starting to realize she's got me by the nuts and she's squeezing. And so he going, okay, I guess I'll do that. And apparently it works because then Ron and Dan are watching her later and she is broadcasting. She is reading the news. So I thought that was great.
Yeah, I thought that was awesome. And it's a great way to juxtapose that you can be a faithful member of the church and fight for feminism and feminist rights. And then they contrasted that really well with these polygamous offshoots and how the women are being more subservient. And, even in that same episode, that's, if I'm not mistaken, that's the one where they showed the conversation between Dan and Matilda, where he's basically forcing his will over her to accept polygamy. So they have even these internal episodes, you have these contrasts between, this healthy version of fighting for your rights and then this oppressive religious theology coming down on women.
I do want to bring up the flashbacks, if that's okay, to church history. There's so many flashbacks in this thing. Like I said, there's flashbacks to the Laffertys, there's flashbacks to Joseph Smith and Brigham Young in church history. And then we've already mentioned there's even flashbacks within flashbacks sometimes.
Yeah.
And of course, this is the function that Alan plays while they're going to keep him apparently on a life sentence at the police station so they can keep coming back to him every time they need to have more flashbacks.
They used him as like a sage guide character as well for the faith crisis. So after he was no longer a suspect, that was his role. His role was to connect the present with the past in a compelling way for Jeb to deal with how these ideas conflicted. So he switched from being suspect to being like, a sage character for him.
Yeah, I kind of got tired of them going back to him.
I did too.
It just kept happening over and over. And there was nothing about Alan Lafferty that suggested to me that he had just had his wife and daughter brutally murdered.
Perhaps that was the actor Billy Howley. Perhaps that's him actually researching into the actual Alan Lafferty and realizing that the real person didn't really express much remorse and didn't actively try and help save his family. But again, that's just me postulating.
Right. Well, he knelt in their blood, right, to pray after he found them butchered.
Mm-hmm.
And it's unlikely that he's the one who called the police, isn't it?
Yeah, I don't think that he would have been the one that called. In the real world, Alan was informed by Dan and Ron. I mean, thanks to this wonderful interview that you dug up, amazing. The real world, Alan knew that they were planning on killing his wife and child, and his only response was, "Oh, don't do it while I'm there, because then I would have to fight you."
He knows it months in advance, and that's the real world, that he knew it months in advance. In the movie, and this is part of my difficulty in trying to decipher what's going on with the movie, because I have a little bit of understanding about what really happened from that interview with Dan Lafferty, but the way they're portraying Alan is as a person who was very much involved with his brothers and very believing in what they did and very much a believing member of the church. And then he has this discussion with Brenda, where Brenda's trying to get him away from his brother's influence. And he says, okay, but if I do that, then you've got to give me something in return. You got to put your career on hold and we got to start having a bunch of babies, which he does. And this is in the show. And apparently he does remove himself from his brother's influence, but at the same time, he is researching stuff on his own as well. It's not just Dan, or maybe it's part and parcel, but I'm not sure. But he loses his testimony of the church about a year before. And this was confusing to me. Once again, going back the second time and rewatching, and then it became more clear that this is why he ends up having a copy of the Tanner's Mormonism, Shadow or Reality.
Yeah, that's the red book that Pyrie has in episodes 5 and 6.
Right, because Alan Lafferty tells him that it was in my stuff that you've already seized. You probably have it in evidence, but it's kind of disguised because it has a different kind of leather-bound cover so that Brenda wouldn't find it.
Yeah.
And know that he's reading this stuff. So he's keeping the stuff from Brenda as well. But within the context of the show, I understand now what's happening more. And he can be this person who not only helps with the flashbacks on church history, but can also help Pyrie understand that there's some problems with the church.
Yeah.
By the way, I talked to Sandra when I saw that. Sandra Tanner.
Okay. Yeah. What did she say?
I said, congratulations. This is after episode 6 top. Congratulations. Your book made the show. And she laughed. She says, yeah, she only found out about that the day before that episode dropped.
Oh, really?
She didn't even know it was going to be. I don't know. I don't know. Maybe this is all super secret, like some kind of big, Marvel blockbuster movie. You got to keep everything secret. You can't tell the story. And then I going to let Sandra know until the day before. But yeah, she was pretty delighted about it. By the way, another thing about Sandra Tanner, when I talked with her about what she thought about the movie, she was at the premiere where they had the first 2 episodes. Her main concern about the movie was the flashbacks to church history. Because she says, I don't know how anybody's going to understand what's going on in those flashbacks unless they already have a very in-depth knowledge of church history.
Yeah, that was one of my complaints with it is if they're going to target this to an audience outside of Mormonism, outside of ex-Mormonism, they need to be much clearer with some of the things that they're portraying. And going into some of those flashbacks, I was able to follow the stories they were telling and some of the differences that they made and some of the creative liberties they took with the events of the past. But the average viewer that has only a passing knowledge, I mean, not a member of the church, the average viewer with just a passing knowledge of Mormonism is not going to understand anything that's happening in those flashbacks. I mean, with the exception of a handful, some of the massacres that they portrayed, the revelation on polygamy, some of those scenes I think are self-contained enough that you could understand those without context. But so many of the other flashbacks, you won't understand what's happening if you don't come to that with prior knowledge. The whole scene about William Law and Brigham Young, where William Law wasn't there, but with the printing press is what I'm referring to, where they imply that Brigham Young was the instigator for Joseph Smith's death. Like, if you don't have any knowledge of these events, like, none of that's really going to make sense, and that's going to be the only perception you have of church history.
And by the way, if you do have knowledge of these events, none of this is going to make any sense.
Yeah, but even if you are familiar with the church history, you're going to go into it and you're going to know where they're taking creative liberties and trying to tell, this narrative. But it's difficult to follow even if you do have that knowledge.
And the second time I was watching it, I saw that what they were doing dramatically with the show, which is that they are juxtaposing this idea that Brigham Young has to get rid of Joseph Smith so that Brigham Young can take control, because there can be only one. And they're flashing back between that and the other flashback with Ron Lafferty, confronting his dad, the patriarch, who's very sick, and not allowing him to get the water or the medication he needs, and not calling a doctor, right? In other words, basically withholding care so that he dies, because there can be only one.
That was the end of episode 5, and that left me like speechless. The way that it was shot and put together was just beautiful. They juxtaposed, Ron. It wasn't outright murder, but he denied his father any sort of medical care, and then they showed that and juxtaposed that with Brigham Young and his hostile takeover of the religion.
Yes, and I thought some people thought, and they may be correct, that there's a lot of stuff in Mormonism that is historically accurate, maybe the wrong word, but let's just say accepted by the vast majority of historians, including the idea that Brigham Young was not involved with Joseph Smith's death. In fact, Brigham Young would have taken a bullet for Joseph Smith. And in fact, Brigham Young was out campaigning for Joseph Smith, who was running for president at the time.
But they needed to parallel that with Ron taking over the family. And so they took creative liberties because they wanted that really jarring comparison.
Right, they did. And this is getting back to your idea that you mentioned about the narrative driving the logic.
Yeah.
Because they create this thing or adopt this idea about Brigham Young being involved in this conspiracy to kill Joseph Smith, which they don't hit super hard, but hard enough that it's hard to miss. And the idea that I've heard expressed is you've got enough stuff to talk about Mormonism, which is historically accurate. You don't have to go over here to fringe theories, because once you go over here to fringe theories, you undercut the credibility of the other stuff you're talking about, like Mountain Meadows Massacre.
As you said, there's plenty of material for them to take from to have a compelling juxtaposition like they did without them having to make up or rely on theories that we just aren't able to corroborate.
Right. There's a new film out, as you know.
Which one?
About who really killed Joseph Smith.
Oh, I don't know anything about it.
Oh, yeah. There's a new theory. It's a conspiracy theory. It was an inside job by Willard Richards and John Taylor.
Really?
Yeah. They weren't satisfied with the fact that Joseph Smith was going to get killed by this hailstorm of bullets coming inside the jail cell and from both sides, from outside through the window and from the landing through the door. So in the middle of that, John Taylor walks up to Joseph Smith and gives him the coup de grace with a bullet up through the chin.
Really?
Yeah, it's hard to believe.
It's tough. Like, that's not something that I would probably get behind, at least not with any evidence. I mean, we don't.
Well, you'll have to watch the show. I haven't actually watched the show. I talked to the person who directed the show, and apparently it's based on ballistics and, accounts of bullet holes and where they were and how many and all this kind of stuff. But I think that...
Yeah, but how do you account for Joseph Smith firing into the crowd coming up the stairs?
Well, he was trying to save himself. This is before he was dispatched by John Taylor.
Okay.
Or Willard Richards. I can't remember which one.
Huh. I'll have to watch that. That sounds fascinating.
Yeah. So I don't want to judge it without having listened to the evidence, although I'm aware of it somewhat from the discussion I had. And but I think it has a huge hurdle to overcome, which is if you grant everything and say John Taylor is there to do an inside job and make sure that Joseph Smith gets assassinated, why are you going to do it in the middle of a bunch of people outside and inside who are going to do the job for you? By the way, the unlikeliness of Hiram actually saying, "I am a dead man," after he gets shot and while he's falling, was highlighted by how awkward that looked when it was recreated. Through the door, boom, "Oh, I'm a dead man." Yeah, it's just not the most natural line in the world.
Yeah. Well, I mean, perhaps that's us coming from, our vernacular from 200 years later, but maybe that was them writing a more compelling death story than actually happened.
I think John Taylor may have written a more compelling death story than actually happened in Section 135, which is, of course, where they got the line from.
Yeah.
Right? He falls saying, "I am a dead man." Okay, I can understand falling and they're going, "I'm a dead man." But don't do it while you're falling. I mean, I would think you'd have other things to think about.
That's like it's like getting your head cut off and then like still struggling for a little bit. Isn't that?
Yes. Shiz. And then saying, "I'm a dead man." Okay, so I've got to go to I know there's so much to cover and this is so much fun, but this whole idea about Alan Lafferty being the guru, the guy who knows his stuff about Mormon history, and he's got to instruct Pyrie about it, because Pyrie is just your basic TBM. He really doesn't know much. He knows the correlated version. He's got the faith in the leaders, and he's busy being a hardworking detective and a good dad and a good son and a good father and all those kinds of things, right? So that's the whole relationship between them. I did note that at one point, for whatever reason, when Alan Lafferty's talking about the first vision, he specifically says that Joseph Smith was 15 years old. And I thought, is he going off a different account or something? Because he's actually quoting from the 1838 account of the first vision, which Joseph Smith is definitely 14 years old. He's born in December of 1805. This is spring of 1820. When I do the math, it's 14 every time.
Yeah, that is an inconsistency. But I mean, perhaps they're counting age the same way the modern church does. I mean, maybe he was just a few months shy of his 15th birthday.
Boom. Oh, man. Good one. Yeah, he was a few months shy of his 15th birthday. Exactly. So that accounts for him being 14 and 15 at the same time. It's just that it was only jarring to me because Alan he knows all this esoteric stuff, all this John Taylor letter stuff. And we'll get to that in a second, this John Taylor letter. But for him to fumble on Joseph Smith's age when he has the first vision without any kind of an explanation for it struck me as odd.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's one of those details, even if they're just, changing things a little bit for the narrative, like just as with the city that it took place in, the police department, why make a change like that just doesn't have any sort of, I just don't see the logic or the reasoning behind it. Most of the other changes that I can understand have to do with the storytelling, the flow of the arc that they're trying to go with. But something like this, I just don't understand why.
No, and I couldn't understand why either. I mean, I had a similar instance of being jarred when Alan's talking about the Mountain Meadows Massacre the first time, and he starts talking about 1859. But then I realized shortly he's not talking about the massacre itself, which of course happened September 11th, 1857. He's talking about the bodies being discovered by the United States Army. And so then I understood, okay, now I understand. So that would be an instance of using a date that I'm not expecting and then explaining it. And I go, oh, okay, you're talking about a different thing than the massacre itself. But then you have him talking about Joseph Smith being 15 when I know damn well he was 14. And I know Alan knows he was 14 with no similar kind of an explanation. And
if he served a mission, then he's got the whole thing memorized. I still have it memorized, and it's how many years later?
Yeah, absolutely. And this is one of the most famous things. It's right up there with I, Nephi, being born of goodly parents, right? It's something every Mormon knows because it's repeated over and over and over again. But another thing that was jarring to me was the fact that we've established Pyrie's role as the TBM who doesn't know much about history, right? He says, don't know much about Mormon history. And Alan Lafferty's going, I know everything about Mormon history. And then in episode 4, all of a sudden now, once again, they're back at the jail cell. They're doing the Alan Lafferty flashback thing. And Alan's talking to Pyrie and quoting this letter, which I'd never heard of before, from John Taylor, but apparently it's the one that has Under the Banner of Heaven in it or something. So they keep coming back to that because that's the name of the whole show, right? Under the Banner of Heaven. And even if it doesn't have that in there, he's quoting something that obscure from John Taylor I'd never heard before. It may be and probably is more well-known among fundamentalist groups.
Yeah, perhaps.
Than it is among TBMs or even people like me who've really tried to study Mormonism, but it's too vast. I've given up hope of ever understanding everything before I die because it's just one of those things that's too complicated, I think. But he's talking about this letter, and then he cites it, John Taylor, 1876. And Pyrie, who has now been established as the guy who doesn't know anything about Mormon history, shoots back at him and says, actually, it was 1879. And then Alan says, oh, wait, it wasn't Alan. I made a note of that. This is actually Robin. It's Robin when they're talking with Robin. Okay, but still the same problem occurs that Pyrie all of a sudden becomes this expert. He suddenly becomes the Dan Vogel of the entire show instead of the Jeb Pyrie of the show. And he shoots back 1879. And then Robin says, oh, well, there's dispute about the date of that. And now they're having this high-level discourse about the date that this particular letter was written that I've never heard of in my life. And so you got Pyrie going from knowing nothing to being the expert in the course of, I don't know, a day, hours.
I mean, the whole thing took place over the course of like 4 or 5 days. So
yeah, I didn't understand
he's devouring this information.
Yes. and he's spending time at the library, apparently, as well as with the bishop, as well as going to church when there wasn't a Sunday in between. And he's doing everything, and he should be everything except what he should be doing, which is trying to catch these killers.
Yeah.
So that was one thing. Now, there's another thing I do want to say before time runs out, because I think it's significant.
Yeah, and I've got one more thing as well.
Do you want to go first?
No, you're good.
Okay. I'll come up with something, so I will have the final word.
Oh yeah, you can have. If you want the final word, I can say what I was saying. But if yours relates to what we're talking about now, go for it.
I love wallowing in my own crapulence. So there was a lot of discussion about these flashbacks and Mormon history and how strange it was. There are people who criticize the fact that when they flash back to Joseph Smith's first vision, there is a light there. He is apparently seeing something going on in the sky that's casting this light, that there are apparently plates, even though they're covered. And so they're going, why do they have this stuff happening when no, that didn't happen? And then people from the other side are saying, why are they having Brigham Young involved when Brigham Young wasn't involved? And why are they having this happen when this didn't happen, or whatever it might be, right? So you have criticisms from both sides of the flashbacks.
Oh, of course.
And the question was always being asked, is this flashback supposed to represent what really happened? I'm putting air quotes on that. Or is it supposed to represent the belief of the person who's recounting the story that is recreated in the flashback, which then allows for more a liberal interpretation? The key to that is given in episode 7, when it's actually answered, when the stake president, who's, I guess, just about to brush his feet off, or, dust his feet off.
Yeah, dust his feet off on Jeb.
Has this incredibly unlikely encounter with Taba when he recognizes that he's a Paiute and wants to go up there and shake his hand and says, we're old buddies, remember how we joined forces to get rid of the Gentiles out of Utah? I got to put a pin in that for a second. Okay. Because what they're talking about, we know the Mountain Meadows Massacre. We know it's 1857. I think if we know anything about LDS history, we know the circumstances surrounding why it happened. And this was just like a perfect storm of events that ended up having this happen, which was atrocious.
Yeah, perfect storm of poor choices and miscommunications. Yeah.
Right. But the one thing we know from history is that this was not Brigham Young saying, we're not going to have any Gentiles coming into Utah.
Yeah.
First off, there is no Utah at that point. There is a territory. And I doubt that Brigham Young would have been calling it Utah. I'm guessing Deseret. But regardless of that, this whole idea is that we're not going to allow any Gentiles enter our territory. So we're going to dispatch and kill these people going through in Mountain Meadows, when that's not the way it was at all. In fact, Gentiles came through there all the time. The Mormons were
because they were going through the Oregon Trail. They were going past Utah straight to my neck of the woods.
Yes, they would go up to Oregon Trail. They might go down to California, which is the direction that it's the Fancher Party, right?
I believe
they
so.
were traveling.
Yeah.
Well, go ahead and check that up. But that's the direction they were going, was down to California, which is why they were going through Mountain Meadows in the southeastern part of the state, instead of going up through the northeastern part of Utah, or the state. There was no state at the time. I keep making that mistake myself. It was the Fancher Party, right?
Yeah. It was the Fancher Party.
Salt Lake City was perfectly situated because they made a lot of money by the immigrants, the Gentiles coming through Salt Lake City, and they needed to get new supplies. They needed to get more food. They needed to get for their family. They needed to get for their oxen, their animals. And the way I envision it, as I was reading the history, is that it was like Salt Lake City was this big 7-Eleven in the middle of, and people counted on this. They counted on being able to, they didn't have to have enough supplies to get all the way to Oregon or California. They had to have enough supplies to get to Salt Lake City, because they knew that they could then resupply and restock. And then they could
restock and get moving further. Yeah.
Right. And with the army coming in, Johnston's army coming in 1857, which is part of what led to all this.
Yes.
Brigham Young said, we have to keep our supplies for ourselves, and we can't be selling it to the Gentiles anymore. And so the Fancher Party was not able to resupply. They were not happy about it, but they're on their way, and history takes care of itself. Anyway, what I wanted to say here. Oh, and also, of course, they have Brigham Young completely involved in it, right?
Oh yeah, they outright have him, marking them for death and saying, "Go and take these guys out." And
then this is the version that the state president is giving. This is his flashback, right? So even according to the state president's flashback, oh, excuse me, this isn't the state president. This is the GA.
This is Taba talking when he says what's actually happening.
Well, here's what happens, okay? And I just watched it this morning, so forgive me if I have to correct you.
That's all right.
No, it's the GA who shows up there in episode 7, right? He is the guy that is so broadly evil that you might as well be having John Williams' Imperial March play when he comes into the police station. It's dun 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 bum bum bum. I think that's the Imperial March.
That is the Imperial March.
He's just evil.
Yeah.
He is an evil dude. But this is his version. But this is the important part that I was saying, is that he gives his story talking to Taba about how the Paiutes and the Mormons joined forces. And then there's this flashback, and he comes out of the flashback, and Taba's laughing, basically in his face, saying, well, us Injuns, Taba says, us Injuns learned a very different version of that story. And then later on now, he's talking to Pyrie and recounting what Taba's grandfather told Taba actually happened. And then they have a different version in the flashback. So I think that answers the question that the flashbacks are not intended to recount actual history, but they're intended to recount the history that is believed by the person who's telling the story that causes the flashback. So I thought that was huge. I was very proud of myself at that moment when I latched on to that.
That changes the perception of those flashbacks, because they get so many things wrong. I'll have to go back and watch that on episode 5 to see who's recounting the story of Brigham Young and delivering the letter through Emma to Joseph. I don't remember who told that one. And that one was one of the most.
Alan, but I'm not sure.
Yeah, it probably was Alan, but.
Oh, can I say something else about Taba? Something else about Taba that was very important was because he would be a very boring character if he were the guy who just knew, this Native American sage, Gandalf to Pyrie's Frodo, that kind of thing. But I thought it was really, really interesting what the director did with this, or the writer did with this, is that Pyrie is approaching the murder in the wrong way because he doesn't understand the history of his own church that is so involved in this murder and how it happens. And he has to do his own investigation and come to his own realization, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah, yeah.
Taba does the same thing. Taba misunderstands what happens too, because he's going with his training and what he understands to always be the case, which is that it's always the husband. So Alan is the one who did it. And he's telling Taba's telling Pyrie, look, you need to trust me on this. I've been down this path before. And in another place he says, and why do we always think it's the husband? Because it always is. And certainly most often it is. And there's a reason for it, but there are exceptions to it. And this is an exception to it. But Taba's going with the rule that he's learned through his training, which is leading him to the wrong conclusion at the same time that Pyrie's doing the same thing, but in a different way.
So the last point I wanted to make, and this was something that my thoughts on it changed a little bit as I thought about it more. With the conclusion of the story, and again, spoiler alert, if you made it this far, then you've got lots of spoilers, but with the conclusion of the story, and the conclusion of this faith crisis story arc that they're telling, it ends with Taba giving Pyrie advice, saying basically to the extent that you can participate without believing for the people that you love. And it ends off with Pyrie becoming, as in the ex-Mormon community we say, PMO, physically and mentally out. It ends with him making that decision so that he can stay with his family and it doesn't upset the world that he lives in. And at first I was really upset about this. I thought it was kind of it just wasn't really a compelling way to tie off the story. And I'm okay with loose ends. I'm not saying that loose ends are bad or shouldn't be done. At first I felt like it wasn't a compelling way to end this arc. I felt like there needed to be a little bit more. But as I thought about it, this took place over 4 or 5 days tops. I don't think it would be realistic to have any other outcome within 4 days. When I think back to my own time and my own deconstruction process, 4 days in, I was nowhere near being ready to leave the church. And so me to put the expectation that he should be ready to leave and throw his whole life in chaos 4 days into this religious deconstruction is just ridiculous. So as I've thought about it more, I feel like this is a very realistic ending to where things are. It's not the end of his story, but I feel like that's an accurate way to tie up this storyline of a 4-day murder investigation.
Right. And when I watched that the second time as well, I was struck by the fact that he's not only following what Taba tells him. Oh, Taba chants, remember, as they're leaving the hotel and Pyre's getting into the taxi cab and I guess leaving, I don't know, Taba behind to do I don't know what. But
yeah, who knows?
Pyre's getting the taxi cab to go to the airport. You're on your own, Taba. But Taba does that chant.
Yeah.
The Indian chant, the Native American chant.
Yeah, this Paiute chant that he's doing.
Right. And then Pyre asks him, does that give you power? Because I think Todd had said it was. He says, "Well, no. I mean, I used to think it did, but it doesn't. But it reminds me of home, and everybody needs a home."
Yeah.
So he's following that as well. Even though I would say that the occasional Paiute chant is a far cry from having to live Mormonism 24/7 for the rest of your life. Okay, but that's the connection being made. But what I thought the more important connection was, and I was surprised they didn't even do a flashback to this, is that what Pyre is doing is he is adopting the method that he learned from Alan Lafferty. Because Alan says that he understood the church was based on lies, in secret combinations, is his expression. But he's learned that a year ago. But then he realizes when he sees Brenda, who follows him to his work, but he describes it as if she's there when he gets there. Anyway, that was a little bit confusing too. But the main thing is that he realized that she was the most important thing and not his religious beliefs. And that's when he said, "My family became my faith."
Yeah.
And I was surprised. That was such an important line. And it was something that obviously Pyre adopts at the end. I was surprised they didn't have a flashback, at least to that one thing, in a series that was riddled with flashbacks. I was surprised they left that one out.
And that would have been a really great line to end on with how they tied off Jeb's story.
I was hoping the line they would end with was, "With great power comes great responsibility." Aunt May.
That's right. But there were no spiders involved, no biting, no superpowers, at least not this time.
No. And every guess that Pyre does, it seems like he gets wrong. He's using his super more. What? Go ahead. I'm sure he got some right. Go ahead.
No, in the beginning, he didn't think that it was Alan, like right off, and he got that right.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Yeah, the guy who comes up to us has blood all over him, which is their blood. Yeah.
I know. All signs point to this guy, and he immediately says, no, not that can't be it.
No, I know this guy. He would never do that. And what happens when there's this horrible murder, this brutal murder that's found to happen in a neighborhood, and some guy has killed all these people, and yet the newscasters go there when the guy's getting arrested, and they go to the neighbors and they say, "So what did you think of this guy?" And they say, "Well, I had no idea. He always seemed like the nicest person." I'm not sure what point that was meant to illustrate. Can you tell me?
Maybe that we're all capable of darkness? I don't know.
No, that wasn't it. Something that you had said that I was responding to, but I get to the end of my story and I can't remember what it was I was responding to. So maybe people who are listening will be able to tell. Is this a bad time to mention the TV?
No, you can mention it, but we're probably getting close to to the end
We are.
here.
We're about 6 minutes. And I hate to end on a relatively minor note, but the TV was on in Brenda's house when Pyrie gets there, finally. Oh, I was leading toward that before, remember, after he gets his clothes on and has family prayer and gets over there. The TV is on where the bodies are, on the floor. TV's on. And I made a little note only because I knew I was going to be doing this podcast and I was going to be called to account. And I said, is the TV on when the murders are committed? Or is it left on after the murders are over? And so I had that in my mind from episode 1, where the TV's on, and I got to the end and no, the TV was not on.
Well, the only thing I could think, and I texted you this, was maybe Alan came in to watch his favorite show and there wasn't going to be a rerun, so he had to make sure he watched that before the police showed up. Or perhaps maybe Ron and Dan were watching TV for a minute, having a sandwich, and then took off.
Well, Ron comes in. By the way, this was super effectively done.
Oh, yeah.
I cannot underscore how effective it was to see the murder through Ron's eyes and to see him watch Dan go up to the door. This second time, obviously. First time she was out back. But to go up there to the door and then to force it open and to hear from a distance from Ron's point of view, Brenda screaming, and then the door slam and then noises inside, probably Dan hitting her. And then to have him waiting and then getting up and slowly walking to the door. He looks over, he sees the neighbor lady going into the duplex. And it's like, oh crap, one of the guys, Chipper Dale or whoever it was, Chipper, in the back seat will go, oh no, because here's somebody watching and seeing. And then she goes in. Okay. And then Ron goes in and it's in progress. That was so chilling. I don't know that it could have been more chilling. I'm really glad they didn't show the actual throat slitting. What they showed was horrible enough. I didn't want to see this happen. And it's not something I was anxious to see. I didn't want to see it. And I'm thankful they didn't show it. I think they did it in the most chilling
it was
way
chilling
possible.
But I think they did it as tasteful as they could, given all of the circumstances and how it played out.
Yes. Now, when Ron goes in, it would make sense if someone turned on the TV to cover the sounds of the struggle.
To drown out the sound. Yeah.
But nobody does.
Interesting.
And so when they leave, there's no indication that the TV's on. We're in the house with Brenda for quite a while. During the time that, he comes up to the door the first time.
Yeah, she's writing a letter and she's narrating over the end of the show with this letter that she's written.
Right. Exactly. Because she puts it in the mailbox, right? And it goes out in the mail. The last thing.
And it gets to Diana.
Yes, in Florida. And then yes, exactly. And then she's reading it. And I thought that was very, very touching, although the timing of that was difficult because she has to Ron comes to the door the first time, knocks, she's out back. And I don't know why she's wearing that skimpy outfit, by the way, in front of God and everybody in her highly Mormon neighborhood, where she obviously doesn't have any garments on.
Leave it to Mormons and ex-Mormons to really care about the underpants of their neighbors.
Yeah, exactly. But she would care. She's a faithful Mormon, right? She would care. She wouldn't be dressed like that in the first place. And she definitely wouldn't be traipsing down to the mailbox in the front, twice. But she goes out there. This is after Ron knocks the first time. She goes out there. She gets, did I hear something? Was there something up here? She was in the back. She comes through. Nobody's there because they've left, right? She goes out there, gets the mail. Oh, I'm very happy. This is from Diana. And guess what? No return address.
Yeah.
Just like I told her. And they show the postage stamp, or not the postage stamp, but the stamp mark, the postage mark on it.
Yeah, the postage mark. Yeah.
Right. And then she goes in and reads it. And then she writes a response. And then she puts it in the envelope and finds the stamp and all the other stuff you got to do. Goes back out there, puts it in the mailbox, comes back in, and does all that in the time that it took them to drive down the road a ways and then turn around and go back. Small thing. But the TV was never on. My point is that we were in that house with her
during the events
for an extended period of time. And before they actually came in to commit the murders, TV was never on. And there was never anybody who turned it on afterward, or at least not shown. So, like a small thing, I think maybe the bigger thing is the garments, because are they trying to send a message? And if they're trying to send a message with that, I'm not getting the message. It's contradictory to what I would have expected.
Yeah, I don't recall any explicit point in the show where they're talking about the garments.
I'm sorry, any point in the
movie
series?
Yeah, in the series.
Well,
they didn't show the symbols anywhere.
Yeah.
They didn't show the symbols, did they?
Well, yeah. They did. Certainly when Ron Lafferty's oldest daughter is cutting the markings out of his garments, which also was very strange.
Yeah.
Because that's not like the first thing that I think would occur to a Mormon girl who's really upset with her dad for beating up on her mom, but maybe it is. So she gets all the marks out of his garments and he's deranged and he puts them on and goes parading around in them, remember?
Yeah. That's right.
Yeah. So yeah, there was a lot of garment talk in the show.
What I was referring to is like there wasn't like an explicit like tying of like how often they were supposed to wear it or any direction of the like requirements of the garments. I'm just like thinking as like a lay audience member that doesn't know anything about Mormonism watching this. Like, I don't think that's something that's going to even occur to them, like in the actual scene of the murder, that she's not wearing garments.
Right. And like I say, it didn't even occur to me the first time. I was so involved in what was going on.
Yeah.
And so dreading what was coming.
I just thought she was like sunbathing in the backyard or something. That's what occurred to me.
And maybe she was. Maybe it was that simple. But of course, when you're making a show that's obviously made for Mormons, by Mormons, for Mormons,
mm-hmm.
then and it just seems like that is a detail that was put in there intentionally. And if it wasn't intentionally, then maybe it required an explanation of some sort. So now we're here talking about garments and everything.
Do you have any final remarks?
I think the very fact that this was fruitful to watch it a second time for me, and probably would be a third time, is the best compliment that I could pay to this series. That there's an awful lot that's going on. I think maybe sometimes too much was going on. There were too many messages that were being given by the director and the screenwriter. But I think that it really held together. There was a lot of work that went into foreshadowing and having these different contrasts that you're talking about between similar situations going on between the flashback and what's going on in real time. I thought that was really, really, I thought it was a remarkable piece of filmmaking. And my comments that may be construed as being critical, I hope they won't be taken that way. I think there's probably, you could do the same thing with any movie.
Oh, of course.
Even the new Top Gun movie, as great as that was.
I haven't seen it and I wasn't planning on watching that.
Okay.
For as many movies as I watch.
Wait a second. You weren't planning?
Mm-mm.
Can I just tell you something? This is better than the first movie by like 10 times. It is so good. And the amazing thing is that Tom Cruise has not aged a day.
I recommended a movie for you to watch. If you have seen it, then I promise I will go and see Top Gun.
What was it?
Everything Everywhere All at Once.
I wanted to see that, and then I went and saw Doctor Strange 2 for the third time.
I went into Doctor Strange, and I was like, that's not the best multiverse movie I've seen this month.
I mean, isn't that crazy that you would have multiple multiverse movies? Not for Marvel. I mean, one of them for Marvel, obviously. But then just showing up at the same time. What are the odds?
If you go and see Everything Everywhere All at Once, I'll go see Top Gun.
Deal.
Okay.
And you will not be, and I know I will not be, disappointed. You will not be disappointed at all. Tom Cruise is he's great as Maverick.
So when are we going to return and report then?
At some time in the future. But this was another thing. We're closing up. I know. This is another thing, though, right? Another thing about, do you say Chekhov's gun?
Yes.
As opposed to Chekhov's phaser?
Yeah, as opposed to Chekhov's phaser, exactly.
Yes, if you're going to use a phaser later on, you need to show it in Act 1.
In the first act. Mm-hmm.
If you're going to show it in the first act, then it needs to be fired on stun in Act 2. So the testimony bearing, this whole thing about Pyrie, he's got to bear his testimony. Because, of course, he's going to go to church again.
That was a big conflict for the last part of the series.
Right. And at least this part, I'm just thinking about it right now, chronologically makes sense. Because the second Sunday after the 24th would be fast and testimony meeting, right? Because that would be the first Sunday of August. Okay, so he's supposed to bear his testimony. And he is so worried. He is so worried because he says, if the leaders hear even a hint of doubt in what I say, then I may be single by fall. Remember? I was watching that part with a non-member.
When his wife explicitly says, she tells him, I want you to bear your testimony so our girls can hear it over the pulpit.
Right, because they're having a problem with their dad. And I'm going, why are these 8-year-old kids having a problem with their dad? Why would they be suspecting anything? Unless, of course, someone's filling their ears with things, which is the only rational reason. But anyway, yeah, I want the kids to know that their dad has a testimony. Bear your testimony. He's worried about it. If the leaders hear any hint of doubt, then he may be single by fall. Talking about the power the leaders have over this stuff. And that just rang untrue, that part. And like I said, I was watching this part with a non-member, and she says to me, really? Because this is what they would do. And I said, no, that part's not right. That would not happen. Where they're up there, I don't know, they have their e-meter out or whatever it is they're doing to measure a person's truth while they're bearing their testimony, right? And then if it's not up to snuff, if you don't hit 100 on the truth device, then we're going to take steps to break up your family. Now, family certainly can get broken up, and it was heartrending, of course, when she's telling him when he's out reading the Red Book in the car that I love you, but I can't do this struggle. I can't do this struggle with you, or something like that. That was heartbreaking because, I love you, but I can't go here with you. And that's what he really needed. Having said that, the idea that the leaders would be doing this because he couldn't sound honest enough was problematic. But it also brought up this comment from this non-member, and the fact that people who are watching this are going to take this as what Mormonism really is. And I had to keep drawing the distinction between Lafferty Mormonism, which I said, there are Mormons like that who take this stuff really seriously, go back to earlier teachings, this is the true stuff, and have this really patriarchal, uber patriarchal kind of view of Mormonism. But then I said, but contrast that with Brenda's family, who was put there. I mean, obviously they're all real characters, but they are portrayed in such a way as to be this contrast.
Yes. Yeah. They were trying to show what regular active believing members look like.
Yes, exactly. And so, we've got to go, but I want to just mention this wonderful scene.
In General Conference, when the speaker is going over, there's a little light that they put on to tell them that their time is coming up. I just want to let you know that the light is on.
I'll be LeGrand Richards in this, because he would ignore the light and he would make, who was it? Ezra Taft Benson hit him on the leg with his cane or whatever it was. That was great. Loved him. For the days of LeGrand Richards. But episode 2, I think it was, could have been 3, when Alan is now meeting Brenda's family. And there's this wonderful scene where he's trying to impress Brenda's dad
by playing with the little kids.
Oh no, this is later. I was going to make a comment about this first. He's trying to impress Brenda's dad, obviously, because they're like together. He wants to make a good impression on it. Who he hopes is going to be his future father-in-law, and he keeps portraying the Mormonism he's learned from his dad, which he doesn't really even believe anymore. But he's trying to portray this Mormonism from Lafferty Mormonism to Brenda's dad, and Brenda's dad is not only not impressed, he finds it offensive.
Yeah.
So there's this wonderful lack of communication going on where Alan's trying to impress Brenda's dad with the Mormonism and the strictness of the Mormonism that he grew up with to show he's a good Mormon. And Brenda's dad is looking at him saying, "Are you crazy?"
Yeah.
But then he goes outside, right? He goes outside with the kids. It's a beautiful scene because what he's doing, he says, there's the first star. They've got the fireworks at Christmas. I know, fireworks at Christmas in Idaho.
Maybe it was New Year's. They might have been doing that.
It must have been New Year's. Okay. So they got him for New Year's. And he's out there. We're going to shoot that star with the fireworks, right? And then he ends up setting the house on fire. But I thought this was a beautiful metaphor. Now, whether it's intended or not, I don't know. But what I took from it was this metaphor of this whole idea of this fundamentalist Mormonism that Alan Lafferty represents, being a case of trying to shoot to the stars and in the process, burning your whole house down.
Yeah. And the father-in-law was not impressed when he came out to see that the house was on fire.
No. And of course, what's happening? Well, you've got Alan out there who's trying to put it out with snow, a very fundamental, basic way of trying to put out the fire. And Brenda's dad comes out and says, here, get out of the way. I've got the fire extinguisher.
Mm-hmm.
A modern convenience, right?
Interesting.
And puts it out immediately.
Yeah.
So like I say, I don't know if all of this is intended, but I'm seeing a lot of things like this in there. And by the way, my final comment, another favorite scene I had was the chocolate scene.
Oh, yeah. When the dad offers him chocolate and he's like, there's a little caffeine in here.
Yes.
I need you to eat this chocolate.
That was the point at which the actor who played, you can check it out, Brenda's dad, he stole that whole scene. He was just incredible. And you're looking it up, I know. But yeah, he was just, there's so much talent involved in this show. I was really, really impressed. And so I hope that my criticisms of police procedure and stuff like that are not interpreted as taking away from the overall impact and a lot of work and wonderful things that went into the show. I know they had a limited budget, but when it came to the attack on Carthage jail, I did envision that Carthage, the city of Carthage, which is the county seat of Hancock County, had more than just one building in it, which was the jail.
Well, I agree. I've been pretty critical on some of the things that I've said, but overall, I absolutely loved it. I loved the performances. The writing was fantastic. Just an excellent series that I do plan on watching all the way through at least one more time. So for all the criticisms that I had, overall, I absolutely loved the experience of watching this show.
So many great performances, so many great scenes. And yeah, I think it's very, very interesting. And I was very, very happy to find out that the flashbacks were not necessarily intended to be historically accurate.
Yeah. And one more plug for the actress that played Brenda. She's got a movie coming out later this year, Where the Crawdads Sing, Daisy Edgar Jones. She's amazing. And that movie is going to be really good.
Maybe we can go watch that together after we've seen Top Gun and Anything Everywhere All at Once. Or is it Everything Anywhere?
Everything Everywhere All at Once.
You know, that's not an easy title to remember.
When you watch the movie, it makes a lot of sense because the title is in parts and the movie is in parts.
I'm guessing I'll understand that better after I've seen the movie.
Yeah, it's and you'll never see an everything bagel again in the same way.
I can't remember the last time I saw a bagel at all. There's an everything bagel?
For the listeners that have seen the movie, you'll get the joke.
So is this like a bagel with everything on it?
It's a bagel with everything on it.
Okay. All right. Well, now you've really piqued my curiosity. And after I go take a long nap, I may get up and go watch it at some point. But tonight's Jurassic Park. It's opening night.
That's true. Hey, I'll make the drive up there.
That'll be super. I look forward to it. You buy the popcorn. I'll get the tickets. You buy the expensive stuff.
I've got the AMC Stubs pass, so I'll get the tickets. They'll be cheaper for me.
Oh, we get the express line.
That's right.
Fantastic. I'm too cheap to do that, so I'll go as your date.
There you go. It's a date.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for having me on your show. I hope that I can get this audio and put it up on Radio Free Mormon as well.
Of course. I plan on posting this Monday, so it'll come live on the 13th, and then I'll send you the audio shortly afterwards.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. It's been a great pleasure for me.
Yeah, it's been a lot of fun. Thanks for coming on to the show.
You bet. I'll talk to you later.
Yep. That was a fantastic chat. I enjoyed my conversation that I had with RFM. He is brilliant, and his insights into the show were very insightful. Thank you for sticking around to listen to the whole episode. And as always, I hope that you have an excellent day.